We are diving right into an absolutely wild story today for this explainer. We're going to explore exactly how a simple, colorful plastic brick, a basic child's plaything, somehow transformed over the decades into a multi-billion-dollar cultural and financial juggernaut. It's a crazy story of near collapse, underground communities, and just an incredible business pivot.
$300,000. Now, you might hear that and think, okay, maybe that's the price of a luxury sports car or even a nice piece of real estate. But no, that staggering figure is the total value of a recent massive theft of Lego sets. Seriously, in the past decade, thieves have increasingly started treating these little plastic bricks like solid gold. And why are criminals targeting the top shelves of toy aisles? Well, because today, the most desirable sets literally cost more than a brand new iPhone 15. We're talking about boxes that originally sold for around $120 being flipped overnight for several $1,000s on the secondary market.
Which really brings us to the core mystery we're unpacking today. How exactly did we get here? How does a company that literally started out making wooden pull toys in Denmark evolve into a high-end collector's brand that adults dedicate entire rooms to? To really understand how we arrived at a world where grown adults are dropping thousands of dollars on plastic bricks, we actually have to go back to a time when the company almost lost the whole shebang.
So, let's start with part 1, losing the core bricks, and that notorious 90s slump.
Back in 1949, the founder took a massive gamble on what was then cutting-edge plastic technology. And it paid off. By 1958, they had perfected that iconic stud-and-tube interlocking design. This essentially established their guiding philosophy, the system in play. That means a brick made in 1958 still connects perfectly to a brick made today. Pretty cool, right? Throughout the 70s and 80s, they expanded wildly with themed sets, turning a basic toy into a true creative medium. But then, the late 1990s hit. Sales slumped terribly. The company was losing money for the first time ever. They had grown way too fast, spread themselves incredibly thin investing in theme parks and media, and honestly, worse than that, they started making toys that didn't even look or feel like Lego. They were making these bizarre Galador action figures with one-off pieces that completely ignored that core system in play.
The stakes were incredibly high at this point. One former executive flat out admitted they had seen a decline in profitability, but simply failed to realize they were on a slippery path. At the time, executives were absolutely terrified of the exploding video game industry. They genuinely believed that physical toys were becoming completely obsolete, so they panicked. And in that panic, they moved further and further away from their core audience and the simple brick that made them famous in the first place.
But while the executives were sweating it out in the boardroom, the unlikely saviors of the company were quietly building away in basements and spare bedrooms, leading us to part 2, the rise of adult fans building in secret.
Enter the AFOL, adult fan of Lego. It's kind of this cheeky, endearing term for a deeply passionate community of adult builders who view these bricks not as toys but as a seriously complex creative medium. But here's the wild part. Back in the 90s, the company didn't embrace these fans at all. In fact, former executives admitted they viewed AFOLs as a source of irritation. The management team really thought they should strictly concentrate on children. Being an adult fan of a toy back then was highly stigmatized, so a lot of these builders were largely operating in secret, totally isolated from one another.
But make no mistake, this ignored demographic was fiercely dedicated. Take a superfan like Dave, who is featured in our source material. Dave and others like him exhibit some really intense hobbyist behaviors. We are talking about curating collections of up to 500,000 individual elements, meticulously organized in custom rooms. They'll literally buy brand new sets and immediately strip them down just to harvest the raw parts to build their own ideas. They have massive bins sorted down to just minifigure hair or, and I know this sounds slightly morbid, just minifigure heads. Eventually, the internet allowed these isolated fans to finally connect. They started organizing conventions, showing up with massive 8-foot-wide, incredibly intricate displays. So while the company was struggling to innovate, these adults were out there pushing the limits of the brick further than ever before.
It took a literal crisis for the company to finally wake up, bringing us to part 3, embracing the community and the massive 2004 pivot.
Under the leadership of a brand new CEO in 2004, the company realized that if they wanted to survive, they had to go back to basics. They cut costs, sold off the theme parks, and completely refocused on the core business of building with bricks. But the real game changer, the absolute turning point, they finally started paying attention to the AFOLs. They engaged in grassroots collaboration, seeking inspiration from fan websites, and eventually even began hiring actual adult fans directly from the community to help design new, vastly more complex sets.
To put that into perspective, just think about a flagship set from 1999, the Star Wars Pod Race. It had roughly 900 pieces aimed at ages 8 to 12. Pretty standard. But fast forward to 2007, post-pivot, they release a massive Millennium Falcon with over 5,000 pieces specifically slapped with an age recommendation of 16 plus. This was a monumental jump in product development. By actively listening to their community, they birthed the high-end kidult market. They proved that complex, adult-targeted models were a massive, completely untapped goldmine.
Superfan Dave really summarizes it perfectly. When fans are running the thing that they're a fan of, they can expand it in ways they know other people will enjoy. That community-driven product development completely saved the brand. The advanced building techniques that fans had literally pioneered in their basements were now officially integrated into commercial products, making the building experience deeper and just way more educational than it was in the past.
Now, this shift towards catering to an adult demographic had another fascinating side effect, creating an incredibly lucrative ecosystem. Let's look at part 4, the lucrative resale market and artificial scarcity.
So the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is the life cycle of a set. The company routinely retires its sets after a few years. Once it's gone from shelves, it's gone. If you miss it, your only option is the secondhand market, and the staggering markups tell the whole story. Take a specific older set that is now worth $1,200 on the resale market. That's already 3 to 4 times its original retail price. But even wilder, just one single rare Harley Quinn minifigure from inside that set is valued at $400 on its own. No way, right? Savvy buyers and passionate collectors treat these boxes as literal investments. They meticulously store hundreds of pristine boxes in climate-controlled rooms because of how rapidly they can appreciate in value.
And the company didn't just sit back and watch this happen from the sidelines. In 2019, they officially acquired Bricklink, which is the world's largest secondary marketplace for their bricks. By bringing this multi-million-dollar resale ecosystem in-house, they sent a crystal-clear message. They take the adult collector market and the immense value of their retired products incredibly seriously. Okay, I know exactly what you're thinking right now. We've talked about thousands of dollars, rare figures, and investments. Walking down the toy aisle today and seeing an $850 box can be genuinely alarming. It kind of feels like the prices have just skyrocketed out of control, right? Leading us to part 5, myth-busting the price. Is it actually more expensive? To demystify this, the fairest way to judge the value is actually the price per piece metric. Take that 2007 Millennium Falcon we discussed earlier. It averaged out to about 10 cents per piece. Exactly 10 years later, they released a new, even larger Falcon for a whopping $850. But because it had over 7,500 pieces, the price per piece was 11 cents, literally just 1 cent higher. And if you adjust that for inflation, it's actually cheaper. The fundamental cost of the plastic hasn't drastically changed. The company is just producing vastly larger, highly complex sets because they know for sure the adult market is hungry for them. Furthermore, just think about the sheer volume of choices available today. Yes, since 2020, there are significantly more flagship sets that cost over $300. But the company is also releasing 4 times the total amount of sets annually compared to the 1990s. You've got everything from simple $10 impulse buys to intricate botanical flower collections designed specifically for older builders to display in their living rooms. There's an entry point for every single possible niche, budget, and age group. Which brings us to our final takeaway. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a profound thought from a lifelong builder. Despite the massive, multi-billion-dollar collector market, the $300,000 thefts, and the $850 boxes, the true essence of the brand remains completely unchanged. As they put it, the coolest techniques I've come up with are when they have constraints. It's about ingenuity. At its core, the value isn't just in how much a rare piece flips for online. It's in the limitless, creative problem-solving that connects generations. So, the next time you see a massive, expensive set, ask yourself, is the real value in that hefty price tag or in the endless possibilities waiting inside the box? Thanks for joining me for this explainer.